After looking into the concepts of politics and political science, and perhaps slightly less confused than what we were at the beginning, in this session I will try to understand with my students what is theory and what is political theory. Now, we have been using the word theory, we have been listening to the word theory right from our student days, but I don't know how many of us we know the root word from which theory came, and that can be some kind of a hint to the meaning which is acquired nowadays. The word theory in English since the middle of the 17th century, 1630s to be exact, was derived from two Greek words. The first word is theoria, Theoria. Theoria meant contemplation, speculation, looking at, or things looked at. And theorein, Theorein, meaning to consider, to speculate, and look at. In that sense, theoria was a noun and theorein is some kind of a verb. Now, there is another word, theoros, whose translation in English language would be a theorist. Now, who was a theoros to begin with? Beyond the days of Greek city-state, around 4th or 5th century before Christ, theoros were a group of people sent out by the political authority of a particular city-state to other city-states to observe their political and social conditions, come back with a report, and compare their home city-state with the city-states visited, and from that comparison to come to some kind of a conclusion regarding how their own city-states are being run or what rectifications are needed or not. So I think we can get some rudimentary idea of what theory can be in English language from its three root words, theoria, theorein, and theoros. To come to a present definition of theory, we may quote D.R. Garrison. Garrison is an expert on distance education. And Garrison, in one of his publications, has defined theory as, I quote, a coherent and systemic ordering of ideas, concepts, and models with the purpose of constructing meaning to explain, to interpret, to shape practice. In that sense, a theory does, with its concepts and meanings, try to explain to us, and if necessary, to shape the reality in which we find ourselves in. Andrew Hegel, once again, defines theory as a proposition which offers a systematic explanation of a body of empirical data. Sheldon Wolin calls theory a systematic knowledge systematically pursued. So much for the quotations. Now, what in our daily parlance theory might refer to? In daily usage, we may talk about two artifacts. One is a compass, which shows us the direction, and the sieve, which helps us in filtrating things from the separating things we need from things we do not need. A theory does both these tasks. It shows us the direction into which we should move. It helps us to select needed, relevant data, facts, information from those which are not needed or not relevant. And that is the first step towards any understanding of reality. Because since reality is composed of simply too many facts, and we have to select among them those which are relevant to the line of inquiry we are pursuing. So without theory to guide us, we would have been like a seafarer lost in the sea. The hull has broken down, and the boat is being tossed about in the waves, not knowing which way to go. And theory is the hull, which gives stability to a boat or a ship. And it is used in the steps from data selection, data gathering, its presentation, its analysis, in coming to a possible inference, and finally also in its refutations if necessary. From the cradle to the grave with respect to an idea in that sense. Now, this is the task of theory. So without theory, we are not being or will never be able to understand the reality. Now, theories can be of course, various types depending on the range of their issues discussed, on their objectives. They can be general theories or macro-level theories, or they can be middle-range theories, or they can be micro-level theories. Now, their theories, if we just now look at our area of political theory, we can find two broad strands of theory developed over its long history of 2,500 years, since the days of Greek civilization. One is normative or normative prescriptive, and the other is empirical. Age-wise, definitely, the normative or the normative prescriptive is much older, and the empirical is much younger in that sense. Empirical discusses what is. It discusses what is found around us, not what we think there should be. It is not bothered with the what ought to be question, which is the sole preserve, sole concern of the prescriptive, normative prescriptive ideas. Just think, for example, Plato's writings on communism as an ideal state, or Aristotle's writings on the ideal state. So they're all discussing a particular problem of the day, couching them in a very normative language, telling us what to do and what not to do, giving us some kind of an ideal to look at, an ideal to copy or imitate. And they often found many things wrong with the reality around them. And surprisingly, this came to be known as political theory. They're actually their ideas, the ideas of individuals from Plato to Hegel and beyond, who were just touched by what they found around themselves, and they're trying to build a universal statement out of it. And this was known as political theory, perhaps the best known example that where thought and theory could be used interchangeably, though they shouldn't be. They mean different things. Can be found in the title of the book we've all read in our student days as almost a Bible, the book by George H. Sawin. The book is essentially on Western political thought, on Western political philosophy, but the name of the book is A History of Political Theory. So that's perhaps the best known example of thought being merged with theory, of thought and theory being used interchangeably. So they are not. What came as political theory for such a long time was basically thoughts of different philosophers, different thinkers, the process of which started from the days of Socrates. In around 5th century BC, Socrates and his group of students started working on classical political theories, their efforts being carried over by later students, first Plato and then his student Aristotle. And there was the classical political theory, a synthesis of three things: politics, the politics of the day, then the idea of a theory, and then the practice of philosophy when they move into the world of universal statements, some kind of an ideal situation, So the three elements, step by step: politics, then some kind of theorization out of what they find in reality. Then on the basis of that theorization, they attempts to build a statement, attempts to write a statement, some kind of a general observation regarding politics, not limited solely to their time and space, but stretching beyond that. And that's the way most of what we know today as political theory came about, a collection of individual political thoughts, the collection of individual thinkings of certain individual philosophers and thinkers on the problems of his day. Now, this definitely is a political theory, but this lacks coherence, because we don't have any singularity among them, any streak of any running thread, any running thread during all these the long period of theorization, so-called theorization, is actually writing about their political ideas. The dissatisfaction started with such kind of political theory, started with Hobbes, way back in mid-17th century. What Hobbes found, that there's a lack of empiricism, there's a lack of dependence on the reality, lack of scientific ideas, scientific training behind such theory building in the past. And Hobbes, we know, was highly influenced by Euclidean geometry, and that is reflected in his ideas of motion and in his entire political thinking, political theory. And from Hobbes it started traveling outwards and onwards till we come to the question which was raised in 20th century, that so long we have been calling ourselves political science. Are we really a science? Because in science we do find theories built on concrete facts, observable facts, quantifiable or measurable data, which were arranged and inference brought out of them through accepted methodology, using concepts which are universally meaningful, universally applicable, and finally getting a theory which could stand the test of time, which could be verified against the touchstone of reality, and which is also open to verification by later theorists. That's the way natural science, or what you call hard science, progressed, and it has progressed much more than what we could do, though we call ourselves science. So with that kind of dissatisfaction regarding the state of a discipline in mind, there started attempts to build up empirical theories, the first requirement of which was to find out vocabulary which can have some universal meaning in that sense. I have just mentioned in passing in my previous lecture the replacement of the word state by the word political system by David Easton. We may or may not accept political system as a replacement word for state. The word state is still there in our vocabulary, but definitely we have to accept that political system can describe the kind of political authority structure we find in various nation states, in various countries of the world, not essentially limited within the European continent. In fact, the word state carried the baggage of being a European concept or a Western concept. Now, that's why we're finding nowadays many attempts, for example, systems theory of David Easton, structural functionalism of Gabriel Almond, communications theory of Karl Deutz, the game theory, the rational choice theory, all of which might not be totally beyond criticism, but all of which have tried in their own humble ways of how to get out of the normative prescriptive tradition, which was understandable solely to the thinker himself. An interesting aside would be at this point that we all know Aristotle was one of the very close student of Plato. a beloved student of Plato. But if we just go through Aristotle's politics, we'll find a transcendent criticism, a no-holds-barred criticism of Platonic concept of communism of wives, property, and children. So which Plato considered to be one of the foundations of his ideal state, that system. So if Plato was not acceptable to his student Aristotle, and we also know that even in the social contract tradition, there are three theories of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, differing fundamentally among the three. So empirical theory that has been tried to be constructed, to be deliberately constructed from the middle of the last century, has tried in its own way to get out of this individual centeredness of political theory which we have so long found, and replace it with an empirical political theory built around concepts universally accepted, where data collection follows certain scientific methods, where data presentation often uses mathematics or statistics, analysis is carried on mainly on different areas of statistics using statistical tools, and the resultant finding is verifiable by other workers or who are working on the same field. Now that might not have given us a very rich tradition as compared to what we found in the normative prescriptive school of political theory, because they're all luminaries in that sense. Definitely we cannot compare to any extent our present political scientists with those luminaries like Plato, Aristotle, Hobbes, Locke, or Rousseau, or John Stuart Mill for the matter. But definitely an effort has been started, an attempt has been started to earn, to some extent, the scientific status which we have been carrying in our name for a long, long time. Actually, the term political science is more accidental than intentional. In Aristotle's time, science was the art of doing anything, and the art of running polis was political science. And from that, we have hung on to the word political science without trying to be really a science. Now, political theory today has not discarded this rich tradition of the normative prescriptive school, but at the same time is tried to supplement, and definitely we have drawn from them their resources, their concepts, their ideas. We are indebted to them while constructing the empirical theories, but the empiricists have tried to really build up which we may call a theory. Some things have been looked into, and they can be looked into by others, and inferences drawn from them, things looked into. So, if we just freeze the time right now, we find before ourselves the very rich tradition of political theory is actually a collection of political thought stretching back to the days of Socrates. And at the same time, we'll find an upcoming body of thought theory trying to be as scientific as possible. Definitely, the study of politics can never be as scientific as in hard study, because the main unit of political activity is human being, and human beings in their social settings. So we are not laboratory animals, we are not guinea pigs, we cannot be tampered with. Our feelings or ideas or ideologies cannot be tampered with. We cannot change over a presidential system for the sake of a laboratory experiment into a parliamentary system. We just can't do that. So there are certain constraints, but even within these constraints, we can, while building, if we really want to call ourselves theory, in that sense of the term, in the scientific sense of the term, we have to follow certain empirical way. The first is acquiring a body of words and concepts which are universally accepted. then trying to use scientific methodology in data selection, data collection, and data presentation, and then trying to build up our inference following that mathematical or statistical analysis, coming to a conclusion which we leave it open for further verification. We should not ever claim that this is the final word. Each normative thinker, each prescriptive thinker thought his idea to be the final word on the issue, only to be refuted later on by someone. But he wrote and died with that conviction that he has said the last word on the issue. The empirical political theory, there is no last word in empirical political theory. There is no lasting theory in empirical political theory. Every single step is challengeable. You can start challenging from the data selection process right up to the conclusion process. Now, that is the state of political theory at present. We may consider one single definition given by David Held regarding political theories, and David Held is more or less a modern person. David Held writes, I quote, "Political theories are complex networks of concepts and generalizations about political life, involving ideas, assumptions, and statements about the nature, purposes, and key features of government, state, and society, and about the political capabilities of human beings." This definition by Held, I think, covers all. This way of looking at political theory, which Held proposed to us, I think, combines or accommodates both the traditions, both the normative prescriptive one as well as the empirical one. So with David Hill's idea about political theory, we are trying to get some concrete idea of what theories can be. As I just told, it combines both the traditions. If you just look behind what we have been trying to discuss today, there may still be some confusions regarding that. That we are not trying to belittle. We are not trying to belittle the rich treasury of ideas which have inherited from the thinkers since the days of Socrates. They do really show us the way about how politics should be studied or on which issues we should concentrate. But when we use the word theory, as the name of the topic is, the nature and significance of political theory, I think we have to be bit rigorous in use of our words. Since if it is a theory, so we should look at it as theory. But what has so long been accepted, so long been called political theory in our subject political science is actually the collection of political ideas, political thought, or political philosophies of certain individuals who are reflecting on politics of their day. Now, as they reflect on politics of their days, they described them, they looked for reasons behind them, and they prescribed ways to get out of crisis or ways to better the situation they found themselves in. And they didn't stop there. They made their statements look like as if they are universally valid across time and space. And that came to be known as political theory.